Today's episode is brought to you by the Vegas Beer Guys and the Sounds in Cinema podcast. The Everything Sequel podcast contains explicit language. You have been forewarned. Hello and welcome to the Everything Sequel podcast. This is the 1982 singles edition. Today, Airplane 2, the sequel, directed by Ken Finkelman. Finkelman! My name is Michael Shantz. I am from the How Dare You Awards. Joining me, as always, your friend and mine, Tom Stewart from Lonesome Whistle Productions. Say hello, Tom.
I guess irony can be pretty ironic sometimes.
Perfect.
Only
Only
Shatner
Shatner can do
deliver a line
that.
like
Exactly right. And of course, joining us in this adventure for the 1982 sequels is Matt Aldrich, co-writer of Coco. Hello, Matt.
Hello.
Welcome again. Thanks for doing this.
I can't. This one. Oh, I can't wait. I feel like I'm sharpening my knives a little bit, maybe prematurely. I think some of these knives I'm saving for Halloween 3, but this I was most disappointed by this movie.
Now you'd think
I was too on a rewatch.
Knives. You'd think there'd be knives in Halloween 3, but there aren't.
Not a single knife. We'll get there. We'll get to the weapon of choice in Halloween 3.
Yeah.
Halloween 3, no knives.
No knives, no Michael Myers. We'll still call it
No horror, really.
No. Yeah.
Okay.
More of sci-fi, really.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But
But that's
we're
not the
talking about
movie we're
Airplane
talking
2.
about, Tom. Calm down.
But this is also a science fiction movie.
We're teasing Halloween 3.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're
But
talking
right
about
now, yeah.
a movie, Airplane 2, the sequel, directed by Ken Finkelman. Obviously, we talked in our last episode at length that Ken Finkelman's fingerprints are all over these single sequels because he wrote Grease 2. In addition, he's written or directed Head Office, wrote Grease 2, Who's That Girl, and Illegally Yours. And then I liked this, 31 episodes of The Newsroom, not that newsroom, some other newsroom. And I wondered if you knew about that, Tom, because I think it's a British television show.
The Newsroom?
I think so.
Never heard of it.
All right. I said, wow, he directed 31 episodes of The Newsroom? And then I hit the button for Newsroom, and it was a completely different set of people. And I thought, what the fuck is going on here? Thought I
Wow.
fell into the Matrix.
No, I have not. I have no knowledge of that existing.
All right. Well, look, this movie, budget of $15 million, opened to only $5.3 million. Both USA and the world cumulatively 27.1. So a profit, but not enough for any studio to say anything other than all planned sequels, including the one we announced at the end of the credits, are going to happen.
You think that's a real announcement? I assume that was a joke.
Oh no, I thought it was not a joke.
Oh no, I don't think that's a joke either.
Yeah.
I think
Wow.
it goes to what we were talking about Grease 2. Grease 2 wanted to be like a four-parter, and they envisioned the same kind of thing for Airplane, to be sort of an ongoing franchise. And Ken Finkelman had his hand in killing both of them in the same year.
Right.
He's got blood on his hands, and I think this is the time we can sort of bring him forward. And he wrote and directed this after the creators explicitly didn't want anything to do with it.
So both the Zuckers and Abraham still have not seen this movie, which I think you alluded to in our last episode, Matt, or in maybe our introduction.
Yeah,
they've not seen the movie.
No,
they refused. They refused to see even a frame of the movie, and it was like, apparently, it was a big work, kind of getting the people back that they did. Robert Hayes, I read some interviews with him where he was really on the fence about whether to do a second one because sequels at that point had a bit of a stigma, and he didn't want to just be like the guy from Airplane. Like I think he had done a very silly movie, and it did very well, and it sort of got away from everybody about how well it did and how much he would go on to just be like associated with that movie and little else. Same with Julie Haggerty and
I would push back on Julie Haggerty. I think she's
still around. She's still working.
She's still working. She's had a fine career. I think.
Oh
she's
no,
great.
I just mean like what sort of the first thing you think of when you think of Julie. For me, first thing I think when I think of either of them,
I'd agree with that,
the Airplane
for sure.
movie.
But I think my point was I think of several movies after that, whereas with Robert Hayes, I think of Airplane and it pretty much stops.
Yes, absolutely.
So was he a straight actor?
I couldn't tell you a thing about him.
I don't know anything about his sexual identity, Tom.
Because my understanding of the original Airplane is that the people the cast were comedians waiting, that they didn't know that they were comic actors until they did that movie. Like they were just
that's
playing...
part of what makes that movie work so well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's Leslie Nielsen parodying roles he has played before,
Right.
Exactly.
finding out that he's a great comic lead.
Lloyd Bridges, Robert Stack, all
Lloyd
these
Bridges
guys.
goes on to do
Yeah.
Hot Shots, and so it's interesting where Robert. I mean, he plays it, I guess, straight.
Yeah, for the most part.
Yeah, I think he does a great job.
But I guess you don't have those same discoveries here. I guess except Shatner. I mean, Shatner hadn't done much comedy before, and he did a lot of comedy. He's done a lot of comedy since.
Yeah, and think about, and we'll get to where Shatner appears in the movie and everything. But again, putting this in context, 82 was also the year that Star Trek II came out, and so
Insane.
Yeah, it's completely insane to have Shatner doing both of these movies in the same year.
That is crazy.
Star Trek II came out in the summer, and then this came out in the beginning
December
of December.
10th.
By the way, also that weekend, Sophie's Choice and The Toy. And the weekend previous was 48 Hours, Gandhi, and The Verdict. So again, this is one of these movies where you look at the landscape of what was hitting theaters at that point. A week later, it was Tootsie. There was a Pink Panther movie that came out. The Dark Crystal. I mean, like all of these movies came out within 4 weeks of each other that year. And Airplane 2, again, on paper, we had this great big hit. We're going to make a sequel of it. We're going to drop it in December right after Thanksgiving. It's going to be huge. Like you can just sort of see the dollar signs in the eyes of the studio. And so it doesn't surprise me that it sort of limped its way to profitability and then found whatever audience it found, I think it largely found on cable in the years after, where it was on, in my house, it was on heavy rotation.
Yeah.
Speaking of the 1982 of it all, I gotta say, kudos for them for getting that E.T. joke in.
Exactly.
I
That's
thought the
amazing.
same
It's
thing.
That was
such a
released
quick
in June.
turnaround.
Because that was, exactly.
E.T. released in June, right?
I had
It
that note
immediately
too.
reminded me of South Park, the movie.
Right.
When
Yeah.
it came out, and they had that bit about Jar Jar, which they added
Yes.
last minute or something because they came out the same year. I mean, that movie came out, I think, just a month or two after
Yeah.
the
And adding
that
something,
Star Wars
adding
came
something
out.
adding something into an animated film is it takes time. The South Park guys have a very quick turnaround. So
they do.
So they were able to do that. I think no other animated film would have been able to be that nimble. But there's the quickness of the turnaround of this joke. There's a joke in the beginning of this film in the airport. There's a sort of a slow pan of a bank of payphones.
Right.
People are calling home and doing everything, and then they go to the last payphone, and all you see is this wrinkled hand, ET hand, come up and pick up the phone, and the
dialing
operator
collect.
says, dialing collect, and he says phone home, and that they said it'll be like $3 billion, and he just hangs up. And it's like there's no actors' faces in that. There's no like really production value to that shot at all, other than the ET hand, which they probably just got it at the Halloween store, a few months before they finished shooting this movie. So it seems like they folded this in at the last minute, which tells me they were working on this thing up to
Release date.
yeah, like that.
right.
It was like when it went into theaters, like it was still dripping wet.
Probably.
Like that.
Yeah.
That's what that joke tells me. So I was amazed to see it,
Yeah.
and I was
Me
like,
too.
oh wow, and I was like, oh, but that means they were patching this thing up and trying to like cram jokes into it up until the very last second, and that's never a good feeling to get when you start out a movie.
Now, are you guys on the same page as me? I thought this movie was really funny in its first 15 minutes. And then I think it picks up the funny at the end of the movie. Although I still have issues with the end, but
I'd semi go along with that. My favorite section is when they get to the moon.
Definitely.
yeah, for me too.
The weakest section for me is definitely about around the hour mark. There's like a 10-20 minutes full of really saggy half jokes. Like the movie's literally coming apart at the seams.
Like Simon.
It just kind of, yeah. And I was really taken aback by that because that is, I know we're not supposed to be comparing to the original, but that never happens at any point in Airplane. The quality of jokes can be variable, but you never get like a kind of 15-20 minutes of, bearing in mind this movie is under 90 minutes. It's like 124.
Yeah.
Again, a red flag, as we know,
talked
Mike.
about that, yeah.
Sequels that get progressively shorter, not a good thing.
Not a good sign.
There's about 10-15 minutes where there's really no there's no jokes that are successfully landing, and that's what I noticed. And I
Well,
really
not just
liked the
that,
last
but you're
section.
gonna
And
start.
I was fine with the early part of the movie, I think.
Okay. I was going to say to the middle, there's a point where you start writing the jokes yourself. You used to, like, because they do a thing in the first movie where they say, somebody needs to go to the hospital. The hospital? What is it? Oh, it's a big building with lots of doctors in it. Those jokes.
Yeah.
And they start coming at a pace in this movie that are so fast and so furious that you start writing them. You know what the punchline is the second it's brought up.
Which makes me wonder how they avoided that in Hot Shots and Naked Gun, because I don't remember having the same feeling,
Right.
even though ostensibly they're all the same jokes.
And it's all the same movie. It's a strange thing. Like I think like I can watch the Naked Gun movies,
Yeah.
and I don't mind that they're a retread of the humor and the style and the there's something that I don't know. I still bought my ticket and I still went. There's something about this movie though that feels like just dead on arrival. I didn't especially like the first 15 minutes. I was like it was the same, red zone, white zone, joke. It was the I'll have the
Time bomb on the left.
time bomb on the left. It had the the really it was I had recently watched Airplane because I was like, oh, I'm going to show my kids Airplane.
Yeah.
And two things happened. One, like I wanted to turn it off because it was like, this is not for children. And two, what happened even before that was they just got bored and left. They just didn't
Interesting.
they didn't get the humor. They didn't understand, obviously they didn't understand some of the references, but they didn't understand sort of the mode of humor of this being sort of like
Gotcha.
a send up of something or zany or non sequitur.
Well, they have no frame of reference for the disaster movies and the serious stuff
Exactly.
that movie was parroting.
And in some ways, the spoof movie, it feels now like a bit of an artifact. Because we don't have like a common culture
Right.
now. Everybody's sort of niched off into their own little world where they can
Subsets.
geek out.
Yeah.
And so like if you were to say like let's make a spoof movie today, like what the hell are you going to spoof? What do we all know? We don't all know anything. And so the idea that it was viable to say we're going to spoof airport 1970.
Right.
You know, and everybody was like, yeah, that everybody will get that joke.
Winner.
And it's like, and we'll pack it full of like people like Leslie Nielsen, and like, yeah, everybody will understand that.
Yeah.
So watching this movie just felt like I was on an archaeological dig in
Yeah.
some ways,
Yes.
like just sort of unearthing this kind of movie that can't really exist now.
So much
You
so
know,
that this is a movie that we forgot that in 1982 you were allowed to see boobs in a PG movie.
and that was the first moment where I was like, oh, this is
3 minutes in, if anyone is counting.
yeah. That was the first moment. That joke, that gag, the gag is that they're at the metal detector and they're at the X-ray sort of machine, and the TSA whatever they were called before TSA or they're watching the screen. And when a man walks through, they see the man fully dressed, and they play the Family Feud strike noise.
Yeah.
And then when a woman walks through, she walks through and she's topless.
And you have the Family Feud.
And you have the Family Feud, you got the right answer, ding.
Yeah.
And it, to me, like, that joke and that bit, it's almost like that's all I needed to see for this movie. I
It's
was
your
like,
gateway joke.
it was like, here's where we're gonna live. This is where we're gonna live. We're gonna live not just in a cheap sophomoric, National Lampoony kind of world, but we're also gonna live in a world where this joke makes no internal sense. Meaning, like, it should have taken the shirt off of everybody. We
Right.
should have seen a bare man chest walk through and get the and then we see a woman walk through and we get the ding. Then we're at least in just firmly in the sophomoric, like, okay, we're in National Lampoon territory, but you didn't even spend enough time on the joke to make it make sense. And that's where I was like, fuck you. Like, fuck you, Ken. Like, I at that point, I was like, fuck you, Ken. Like, I guarantee you, the Zuckers and Abrams, like, they would not have made that mistake. And I felt like that kept happening all throughout this
Or
thing.
they would have commented on
Or yeah, right. I
that-
was just gonna say
that lack of logic as part of the comedy.
Yes, they would. There's something about their jokes, though, that follow a certain set of rules and function. That there's a clockwork to it,
Definitely.
and a density to it. Like they're very good at sort of like, in any given scene, there's three jokes. There's the foreground joke, the mid joke, and then the background joke. And that's why those movies stand up to multiple viewings. And I felt like Ken was like, I'm going to give you one joke at a time. We're going to just line them up like boxcars on a train, and you're just going to sit here watching this train go by, waiting for the gate to go up so I can continue on with my day. That's what I felt like.
I think there's I think part of that
Ken
part of that
Finkelman.
holy
part
shit.
of those rules and part of that framework for the Zuckers is whatever you happen to be parodying sets
Yes.
the rules and the tone. And here we're split between a movie that is a parody of sequels in general, and also we've added science fiction.
Science fiction. I was just gonna say.
And we
But
want
we're still
there
trying
to be,
to stay in the
We're
realm
still doing
of,
an airport
of airport movies, right?
and then we want the airplane, the parody of airport style movies as well. So you've split your focus three ways. You're kind of lessening your chances that it's gonna, you've split your framework before you've even started. And that was, I mean, seeing this for the first time, it was a big shock to me that this was a science fiction movie.
I wish it had been like, I wish they had gone all in on that. Like you're saying, they're
Yeah.
split between like I was actually reading the Roger Ebert review of this movie from '82, and he had a similar note. He said it never quite knows that it's that takes place on a spaceship. That like
For
you
sure.
sort of forget in the middle of the film because it feels and acts so much like a plane that you forget that you're actually on a spaceship.
Well, and specifically,
and it's almost,
too, like, because there's a moment where this shuttle is hurtling towards the sun, but there's a line that says, we're going through the asteroid belt. And, of
Yeah.
course, my first thought is, that's the other fucking way.
But then didn't they make a joke about that?
Do they?
Or no, they didn't.
I don't think
no,
they do.
didn't.
No, that's the problem. They don't have the follow-up gag that a good set of comedy
Right,
writers would come up
exactly.
with. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So
it's
again, this
this
is something that, go ahead, Tom.
No, it's I feel like in having these different things to parody, each joke speaks to one of those well at any given time, but never adds up to a satisfying whole. So you know, gag by gag, you can go, oh, that's a good spoof of
Right.
the proliferation of sequels. How many Rocky movies are there going to be in the future?
Right.
Here's a gag about all our future might be terrorism, and here's a Star Wars joke.
Here's a reference to 2001.
But the comedy can't speak to all of that at once. Like one gag or one set piece can't speak to all of that at once.
Right.
And yeah, I wish it, because this to me seems like the first, one of the first, if not the first sequel parody, and I wish they'd have done much more with that side of it. Not, I mean, obviously we're doing this podcast, so that's why. But that to me is its USP. That it's like, has anyone ever spoofed sequels before? They have since. I don't know if they have before. In the specifically.
That's interesting.
Because. But then a lot of the interesting things this movie says about sequels are kind of by accident. I mean, this movie in 1982 doesn't know that we'll have this stream of sequels where they relocate to space.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they don't know that that's what they're parodying.
Right.
But watching it now, it's like, if this had been made post Jason X or Leprechaun in Space, that would have been the obvious reference point. But that's not their reference point. That's just a happy prophetic accident. They're not really parodying. They're just parodying individual tropes of science fiction movies that have been popular in the last 10, 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
Like 2001, Star Wars. It's strange. Like, I'm able to make more of it than they are. I think.
I agree,
Yeah.
and I think, and so when for me the story, again, on paper, this is a perfectly reasonable pitch for a sequel to Airplane. We're gonna get the gang back together. It's gonna be the same crew, but instead of a plane to Chicago,
Yeah.
we're gonna
No,
put 'em
all
on
of
a
that.
space shuttle. We're gonna put them on a space shuttle to the moon, and everything is going to go awry, and Ted is going to have to land the ship again.
Let me
Yeah.
ask you this,
And-
though. Do you take issue with Ted reverting back to where he was in the first movie?
Not at all.
Okay.
Like I think the
But that's
in
the
same way
that's a parody of sequels right there.
yeah, in the same way that you were saying about Grease 2, that being a musical affords you certain amount of latitude on some things. And you're sort of along for the ride. I sit down to Airplane, and I'm not expecting, like, what's the next chapter in Ted's life all about?
Well,
Like,
I
I'm
guess
really not.
The reason I
They
ask
give you
is
a
because
lot. They do give you a lot of that, though. A lot of the story here is stuff that happens in between movies that we've not seen.
And I actually found that to be the most, for me, the funniest stuff was the courtroom stuff, because it was a parody of courtroom dramas.
Yeah.
And so there were.
how
new,
great
at
is
least.
Raymond Burr?
Raymond Burr. It's
So-
like, have you ever laughed like
You
that?
ever-
Yes, I have.
I have. That was great.
Well, that's the thing is that felt like precious new ground that this movie was finding, and the same way with the moon base at the end and Shatner and like the blinking, beeping, like all of that stuff felt like precious new ground, and then the rest of the movie felt like B-roll from Airplane 1. It just felt like
Like so much of
jokes
this
that
movie,
I swore were in Airplane 1.
because they are, Matt.
I was like-
they are. I swear to God.
oh my god,
This movie retreads so much from the first movie. I mean, it's inexplicable and it's offensive.
It's kind of like, I feel like this movie is a bit of a funhouse, where you quite don't know. Like, I can't reconcile my memory of the movie with watching it again. I kind of don't know what movie I'm looking at. I don't know what's a reflection and what's the actual path I'm supposed to be walking. Like, it's so kind of discombobulating, I guess, that I'd never quite know what this movie is all about. Whereas I do watch the first one and I go, yeah, this was a parody of a certain kind of movie that was popular at the time, and I can sort of watch it in a museum in a way. Do I enjoy Airplane now when I watch it? It's like, it's total like nostalgia. Whatever enjoyment I get is from, oh, I remember watching this and laughing because nobody was making movies like this.
Yeah.
But now, like, there's been literally dozens of movies like this made, and I feel like, again, the spoof genre is sort of played out and kind of impossible now. And so I feel like looking at this one as being the first spoof sequel is I don't know. It just feels like a museum piece. It just feels like like I said, like an artifact of something. It's completely dead.
Tom,
At
do you
times it
really
even
think-
feels dated for 1982. I mean, there's Dick Nixon masks,
Yeah.
and there's
Yeah.
like hippie parodies. I was thinking, even for 1982 seems late for all this. This feels like a movie made by old people.
Somebody maybe of the age of a certain Ken Finkelman.
Like the 60s and 70s play into this way more than they should, I think.
Yeah.
In terms of reference
Yeah.
points. And I mean, there are a couple of occasions where, in defense of the movie, they are self-aware about repeating the original movie. Like, that's also built into the concept. Lloyd Bridges saying things sure haven't changed in front of a photograph, in front of like two
Photo of a photo of a photo.
a photo of a photo of a photo. When Elaine says, "I have the strangest feeling that we've been here before. That this has happened before." But we've talked about this on the podcast before with Die Hard 2, and like, is it really baked into the concept, or is it just like Bugs Bunny turning to the camera and going, "Wow, this is happening twice"?
Right.
Like, is that
We're
enough?
a sequel.
And sometimes here I don't know how acknowledged all of the repetition is. Even though they are obviously making a big deal about telling us that this is it's a parody of a sequel, and so part of that is that we're going to do everything again. But there's limits to that, I think. I mean, I still think the whole hospital sequence, which is beat for beat as it was in the original, the mental
Right.
hospital scene, which
Yeah.
is beat for beat the hospital scene from the original movie. There's moments in that where I don't think they know that this is the same thing necessarily. I think they may have forgotten that they've done every single one of these jokes in the same order that they've done them.
I don't. I think you might be giving Ken Finkelman too much credit. In like knowing that it's like a parody of a sequel. Like it feels, these feel like
that's what I was gonna ask.
obligatory. To me, it feels obligatory. Like they go like, well, this is what worked, and we're gonna do this again. I see a sort of a cynicism in the construction of this thing, as opposed to we're gonna make fun of what sequels do.
I wasn't
think
sure
they were-
either, Tom, that this movie is parodying sequels in and of itself.
I think it's unsuccessful and underuses that idea, but I think they fall back on that once in a while.
I think they definitely do turn to the camera, like you're saying, and kind of wink, wink, and like, isn't
Sure.
this funny? We're kind of doing this all over again. It just feels like, well, then, if you're going to make it a parody of sequels, what exactly are you parodying?
Right.
And what are the sequels you're referencing? Because the only movie you're referencing is your own movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, there's a brief nod where they reference the Rocky sequels, which strangely, again, Rocky 3 came out in 1982. It's not like there were a ton of Rocky movies by 1982. So it seems like an odd target for that. But yeah, I don't know. I didn't get that meta quality to it. It just, to me, if it was there, to me, it came off as like kind of lazy and not really like self-aware meta.
That's what I agree with you.
I think
was my
it's
feeling.
something that, again, it's like you think about where this has been done better, and obviously the Zuckers have been able to do this with their other franchises. Mel Brooks is able to do stuff like this that is very meta, very successfully. You know, this is a far cry from Spaceballs, which, you know, and this movie anticipates Spaceballs completely in so many different ways. Especially, you know, but Spaceballs is just done so much better in every respect.
Yeah,
this did. I mean, it's just there's so many strange choices of directions to go in, both on a macro and a micro level, and you know, I'm sure we'll get into the weeds on this, but I don't know why there's jokes about rape trials. I don't know why there's so much racism in this movie.
Yeah.
I don't know why there's abortion you know, all this stuff that is just shocked me. It left me aghast, quite frankly.
Me as well. And well, look, let's. I want to talk about those things in depth. So we're going to take our first break, and then we'll come back and we'll start hashing out some of the incredible choices of this movie right after this.
I like to think I know something about beer, but nowadays even I get overwhelmed when confronted by the exhaustive selection of craft beers they have at bars, breweries, and even grocery stores. Back in the day you had one, maybe two craft beers to choose from, and if you were confused, you ordered a Guinness. But in beerstinations like San Diego, the craft beer options lately are in double, sometimes even triple digits. So what's a beer drinker to do? You need what I need, the Vegas Beer Guys. Your beer of choice should be a perfect blend of malt and hops. And so a live show about beer needs that same balance. And the Vegas Beer Guys matches beer expert Dan Aker with self-proclaimed beer novice Stephen J. Weiss. The results are eminently drinkable. They're on Facebook, they're on Instagram. They'll try new beers, they'll tell you about beer. Think of them as your beer Sherpas guiding you up a foamy-headed mountain to reach the peak of your pint. God, I need a beer.
And we are back. Tom, Matt, and I are here discussing the 1982 sequel, Airplane 2, the sequel. So,
do you need to like brush your teeth after that?
That was a mouthful, you know? We were talking about meta things in our last segment. Even just talking about that got a little meta, or introducing it. So, when we left, we were talking about some of the major problems this movie has in ways of racism and gender politics, or what, you know. Does anybody want to take the reins on this? Like, what offended you most?
I will say,
because there are a lot of problems.
Again, putting myself through the ordeal of watching all these movies from 1982, it shouldn't surprise anyone to, you know, hear that there's a lot of this going on.
Right.
You know, Airplane 2 is not a lone offender in this arena,
no.
right? So yeah, so I, you know, it in some ways it uses the "I'm just kidding" it uses it sort of as a two-edged thing. Like on one edge, it's like, hey, we're we're sending
Yeah.
it up. We're pointing at it.
That's
we're
a
saying
good.
that
That's a
this
good
is,
caveat. Yeah.
this is not okay. But on the other hand, we're also using humor as sort of a way to shield ourselves from criticism. And so we're just kidding. We're just kidding, being the sort of the first refuge of the
For
racist
sure.
and the offensive. So so this movie is problematic, and it is. But I think the problem is not just like we're looking at it with eyes,
New
2021
eyes
eyes.
yeah.
I think what we're seeing is in these movies. Let me back up. When I was watching Annie, another 1982 musical, I watched it on Stars, and they had the little Stars logo, and then they have like what the rating is, and the sort of the warnings. The first time I saw the warning OC for outdated cultural reference or depiction, outdated cultural depiction.
Wow.
That is, and then we're talking about. There's the character from the original Annie comics. This sort of
Oh yeah.
magic. This guy named Punjab, who's like this sort of magic helper to Annie, and he was from the comics. They brought him in for the movie. He was not in the musical, and it's the guy who eventually went on to do all those Sprite commercials with the lemon and the
7
lime.
Up commercials,
7 Up
right?
commercials, yeah, it was that
Yeah.
guy. And so this was the outdated cultural depiction that they're talking about, and I took such offense at the phrase outdated cultural depiction because we're still depicting people in that way. Like we're just throwing a lot of sand over it these days. Like what's so jarring is how exposed these older movies are, and how sort of unapologetic. When Airplane has the man in the beginning. This is in the first 15 minutes of the movie. They got the janitor, his African American guy, comes in to vacuum out the cockpit, listening to headphones while Car Wash is playing. And then they make a joke where they turn off the artificial gravity, and he starts floating around, and nobody notices. And it's just a pratfall that he does. And again, the internal logic of this joke does not work. It's a sloppy joke, but it's also like it's a
Oh my God.
bald,
It's race
baldly racist depiction, and so it provokes a certain kind of gorge rising, and part of that gorge rising is that knowing that this was completely acceptable and funny in 1982.
Yeah.
Like, got past everybody, got past every person at the studio, got past Ken Finkelman's keen eye, got past the tests.
A lot
got
of credit
past
to
the
Finkelman there.
got past the screenings, got past the censors, it got past everybody. It was 100% in the acceptable wheelhouse. And so that it is not acceptable
Giving it
now
a little too much credit there.
to show something like that is it's obviously it's an advancement, but it's what kind of makes me cringe is knowing that in a lot of places, a lot of people, that joke still has plenty of cultural currency today. That joke is
Right.
still funny today to many people. And this movie,
Many people that were recently in the Capitol.
well, that's what I'm saying. I took umbrage with the word outdated because it feels this feels very current and charged, and if anything, watching it now, it has whatever the opposite of comedy is. Like, it is the opposite of comedy. And it's one of the reasons why I was having such a hard time watching this movie, because it's not just this one scene, and you got everything. I mean,
It's
everybody.
peppered throughout it.
It's not just the racism.
The dad who talks about women, and they're
it-
all asking for it.
The Middle Eastern terrorists, the sort of the Japanese tourists with all the cameras around their head, like it.
Wearing so many cameras, he's top heavy and falls over, is the joke. Yeah.
Oh my God. But what's... Oh my God, yeah. But I'm really interested in this idea, the idea that Matt brought up about, what's their deniability for all this stuff. Yeah, it's like out there, it's barefaced, but how do we walk it back? And one way is that kind of it's schoolboy comedy. We're just kidding. Don't take it so seriously. Then the other one is because it's part of the sci-fi dystopia of the movie.
Do you
Like
think it's
that is a big
conscious?
part of why they feel justified to do these gags, or at least it's their way in to these gags, that we can make all these jokes because the future is going to be much worse than now, so society is going to be much worse than now, and all this stuff is going to be happening. I mean, in nearly every context, it's like, well, think about how things are now. What it's going to be like 20 years from now. And that either leads to this kind of like gentle Seinfeldian observational comedy, like, oh, the music in elevators is getting loud. Imagine what it'll be like in 20 years' time. But it's also in like, oh, terrorists will just be able to walk through airports and we'll be beating up, old white women.
Who come back
And
in
it's
this
all
movie
kind of
also.
disguised.
Come back,
I
right,
mean,
or at least one of them.
it's one thing to kind of put it out there. And the car wash gag, which I wrote down as well, it's like, wow, somehow this movie's racial politics are worse than Airplane, with there's two jive-talking characters who are like leads in the movie. And again, it was like what's their out? And their out is, oh, it's science fiction. Look, zero gravity. He's floating around. So they've got that it's science fiction, that we're in a dystopia, and this is how they're kind of writing around these awful things.
Yeah, but I also think about that in the context of 1982, which means this movie was probably being filmed in 1981.
I think it was being filmed in the early part of 1982.
November 29th, 1982.
You could be right. You absolutely could be right.
I
about
have a
that.
feeling they were still shooting
but
it
I guess my
on
point
opening weekend.
was, my point was that we're in the dawn of Ronald Reagan's America, where Ronald Reagan was saying, hey, it's okay to be American. And we were all sort of basking in the glow of his saying, let's feel better about ourselves. So does that dystopian argument fly with...
I mean, but again, I think that's where they're being disingenuous and saying things that are very conservative, but masking it as kind of like satire. It's like social satire. But literally by saying,
this movie calls Ronald Reagan
and calls him
out.
senile before we
have the Ronald Reagan Memorial Psychiatric Center where people are being beaten with rubber hoses. And they even have a senile joke.
I think that's
Long
a
before,
smokescreen to say, that we're really progressives doing edgy comedy. But that's a lie. This is as conservative as it gets.
Right.
But these are all the smokescreens and masks, that the bells and whistles, I think, that they're putting on it. And it's again, it comes down to tone. Like, there's all this prescient prophetic stuff in the movie, like gay marriage, like terrorist attacks on flights, all this sort of stuff. Space travel, what have you, commercial space travel, but it's that sort of the tone. But the tone of that is all like offensive to the people you're representing. It's like we're making fun of the fact that two men are kissing each other. It's like, that really happened. That's a part of our society now. It like gay marriage is as normal as that. But that's not what the gag is. The gag is, let's laugh at these two middle-aged businessmen kissing each other. So it's a homophobic gag, but
yes,
dressed up in this. You can say, wow, look, they're prescient because gay marriage is a part of our future now. So I think there's so many outs for the writers here, which just makes that
writer
shamelessness worse, because it's shamelessness in the way it's presented, but you can walk it all back and make it look like you're being hip and progressive and predictive, and it's just not. because the punchline of the gag is always let's punch a woman in the face, and they're hiding behind the sequelness of it as well, to do more of the offensive stuff more of the time. So, it's a sequel, so we need 3 times as many boobs.
Right.
It's a sequel, so we need to punch a woman in the face, like, repeatedly, again and again and again.
Right. I feel like the what you're describing, what I'm hearing is like an intentional brashness. I'm going to say the thing that everybody else is scared to say, or I'm going like an Andrew Dice Clay, like it's going to be so in your face that it's going to be a parody of itself, and in its sort of aggressive nature. I don't actually get that from this movie. This just feels more like what you were just saying, which is, well, this joke was funny in the first one, so let's do it again. And like, I just keep seeing sort of the, I just keep seeing the laziness of it over and over again.
That was my big thing too. Like, this movie felt lazy in that way, Matt, because of how much they're recycling.
Yeah. And the only times where I was like, oh, tip of the hat, like, was again in the courtroom scene. I was like, oh, they just did a flashback inside of a flashback. Like that's excessive. and it's playing with the trope of flashback in the same way that they played with the trope of flashback in the first one, where he was telling the story of meeting Elaine in Drambuie, and then they come out of the flashback and the woman he's talking to is dead because the story is so boring. But it's like, and so they were like, well, let's just do that again. Is that woman free? Yes, she's free. Get her.
Literally the same exact woman. Yeah,
so
exactly.
I don't feel like they were. This movie just doesn't feel like there was thought put into it. I don't know. Like, it just feels like it was like we need an Airplane sequel in 3.5 weeks. Get me Finkelman. Like, that's just what it felt like. That it was just like, and when you're done with that, Finkelman, write me a High School Musical. Like it's like the old studio system. Like, he was just on speed dial, and he could just like crank these scripts out. I know it's like it's if anybody's listening to this wondering, should I go watch Airplane 2? My advice is no. Don't. I wouldn't bother, honestly. I just wouldn't bother with this movie, and that's why I sort of rated it as not good, not entertaining, not watchable.
Right. I have to agree with that.
But despite that, I think there's a lot of laugh out loud moments. I think often in spite of the material, for sure. But Raymond Burr is very good in that. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, that scene works better partly because it is a new, it's a new new target of parody for the franchise. And it's more deadpan because the courtroom drama as a genre is pretty deadpan, so you can have a lot of fun with that. Also,
that's the other thing that this movie's missing, isn't it? There's not enough deadpan. I mean, there's a lot of winking.
There's just, to me, it's just like it's like puns. It's like a lot of puns, a lot of like like Amelia Bedelia literal jokes, Simon's turning to jelly. Let's show a jello,
his arm falling off.
He's coming apart. We'll show his arm falling off. He's turning to jelly. Let's show him as a mannequin made of jelly. It's like, oh God, like the Yeah, it's just like again, like those jokes are just kind of like sight gags, half baked. I don't know. I find
I ended up liking the smaller gags.
Like what?
I like a nurse. I like a nurse wearing on the back of her shirt, "I heart sanity"
yeah, I guess so.
at the mental
Yeah, and
institution.
she goes on to sort
Little
of
shit like that would make
yeah.
me
This
laugh.
is all happening in the background of the scene, and she's checking the oil
The oil
of
of
the person.
yeah,
She's putting
exactly.
a dipstick, all the way down his throat and checking the oil the way And what's so funny about that too is that like, talk about a cultural reference that my kids are not going to get.
Right.
It's in 1982 it was not uncommon to go to the gas station and have somebody check your oil, and you sort of knew what that procedure was all about. And so she's changing his IV like it's an oil can, and she's checking his oil, and now you're looking at it going like, what is this bizarre dance going on behind the scene that I'm supposed to be paying attention to? It all just kind of, yeah, it's of a bygone age. This movie is just such a relic.
And to me the real, I mean, it's partly because he's one of the few people who came back, but what the real kind of victim of all this inability to surpass the original movie, it falls down particularly Lloyd Bridges, but also Peter Graves. I mean, Peter Graves is forced, I'm sure, against his will to do a Mission Impossible joke, which the original didn't do almost out of principle.
Yeah.
Like, they found something else to do with Peter Graves other than make fun of the fact that he's Jim Phelps from Mission Impossible. But this movie can't, like, because it's like, well, what's left with Peter Graves? The fact that he did this popular show. And even that, they still do. And I gotta say, I give Peter Graves complete credit for his reprise of the cockpit inappropriate sexual chat with the child gag from the original. He pulls that off.
Another 1982 connection, by the way, because that's the kid from Poltergeist.
Well, that's just throwing a spanner in that scene for me. But
Yeah.
but like I remember watching that and it's like, well, they're clearly going to do the same gag again, and then they write it in such a way that it puts off the inappropriate comment to the very last moment, and Graves is doing a really good job. But so there's a little bit of something for Peter Graves to do, and then they end up giving him a Mission Impossible joke, and then he disappears from the movie completely. With Lloyd Bridges, I mean, I just end up feeling so sorry for him, because they literally they hired him without knowing what they were going to do with him other than what he'd already done. And as much as I'm never going to not want to see Lloyd Bridges doing that smoking, drinking, substance abuse shtick, but there really is nothing there. Like, nothing. There is nothing you can drain out of that pool, partly because Lloyd Bridges did such a wonderful job the first time. And again, it's like he's just abandoned in the movie, and then we get to Shatner, and it's like, okay, so here's a new parody
Here's
idea
the new Lloyd Bridges
that speaks to the sci-fi-ness of it all, which we haven't really seen yet because it's all been about redoing Airplane. And there was a sigh of relief. It's over an hour into the movie before William Shatner turns up. That was a big surprise to me.
Well, and William Shatner, I think we've talked about this before, Tom, like what I do remember from a first-time viewing, or I'm sure I saw it several times when it came out on video, or like you said, Matt, on heavy replay on the HBO or whatever. But the one gag from this movie that stuck in my mind from the last time I saw this movie until I watched it this week was the sight gag of him being on the computer screen and then opening the door.
Yeah.
That stuck with me.
Yeah.
That's a funny gag.
And it's a good gag. Yeah.
I liked them, having to sort of shush the doors open and close.
I thought that was really funny. I thought, for some reason, I thought the best delivered line in this entire movie is when he says, "Let's go to the tower." And he goes, "Oh, we don't have a tower, sir." And his response of no tower, the way
Yeah.
Shatner deletes like no
But
tower,
the
it's just fucking great. It's so pitch
and
perfect.
and even
I had to read like 10 seconds of that thing like 5 times and rewatched.
it's the
it.
interesting thing because even though it's far from deadpan, what
Uh-huh.
it actually gets to that made the the performances in the original movie work is that he is doing what Leslie Nielsen and Robert Stack were doing. They were doing
Yeah,
comedy
right.
without, but playing it as a drama. So Shatner, there's no discernible change in Shatner's acting from how, if you watch Star Trek the original series, he's making all the same choices. So he's not leaning into the parody. That is his acting style, comedy or drama. And so it actually feels like up to the level of the performances in the Leslie Neal performances, because you're getting Shatner doing a Shatner character. I don't feel like he's leaning into the comedy of it at all. He's leaning into the crazy
No,
Shatner
I think
of it.
I think he's in on the joke.
Yeah,
I think
Totally
he's in on the
right.
joke.
That's what it is.
And talk about another. We talked about Star Trek 2 coming out that year. There's a joke in this movie where he goes, "What is this thing? I don't know." They're at
The red
this
thing,
like
yeah,
long
going back
tube
and
red
forth.
thing, and it's got a light that goes back and forth. They're like, "We've been looking at it all day, and we think that this light turns on and that light turns off, and it goes back and forth. And is that all it does?" And yeah, we think that's all it does. That's an actual prop from Star Trek 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
That thing that they're puzzling over. So he is quite literally sending up
Yeah.
Captain Kirk live in real time and making fun of himself and sci-fi. And like in the courtroom scene, like that's where I felt like the film was breaking new ground. It just felt like the rest of the film I had never seen. This was almost like the shot for shot remake
Right.
kind of experience.
And I think, but they think they can get away with that because it's called Airplane 2: The Sequel.
yeah, it's like
I think that's the difference.
Is that intentional or is that
It's
lazy?
both. I think it's
I don't
both.
know.
It felt more lazy than
I don't
intentional
know. I
to
mean,
me.
yeah.
I was
well,
not
it's
reading
all
into that.
lazy, but some of it is intentional. I think.
We'll never know until we get Ken Finkelman in the hot seat.
What?
I
You know
think
what
Ken-
what the
really
hell
struck
Ken
me is
Finkelman is Matt's David R. Ellis to you, Tom.
what struck me about
Who-
the
He directed a couple of Final Destinations, Matt.
and
Oh,
Snakes
okay.
on a Plane.
Tom believes he's a comic genius.
What really struck me about how the Star Trek parody works in here is that Star Trek is still such a niche cult thing compared to where it stands now in our culture that they have to throw in stock footage from Star Trek of the Starship Enterprise
Yes.
just in
Right.
case anyone's still not getting the gag at that point. I mean, that's a bad choice, but I kind of feel that, in 1982 they're like, there's probably still a section of the audience who don't even really know that this is sending up Star Trek. Let's throw in a a cutaway to the Enterprise for no reason. It was funny, like sci-fi is obviously growing, and especially in cinema at this point. But it's funny to me that Star Trek is still just the nerd thing, and the comedy
Right,
sort of
okay.
In
plays on
82,
that
yeah.
level. I mean, Al Jean and Mike Reese who were Simpsons producers and writers, also wrote jokes for this movie, and I just wondered whether some of the Star Trek stuff was their own little nerd kind of like subtext.
Add on. Yeah,
And why
right.
it works so well, because it's so specific to something that now we look at and everyone thinks of these as obvious jokes. But I guarantee you there's a section of the audience who'll be like, what are they parodying? What is, like, I haven't seen the reruns. I didn't go and see Motion Picture.
Yeah. All right, let's take one more break, and then we'll come back and we'll finish up with Airplane 2, the sequel. If you like podcasts like I do, boy, do I have a treat for you. You need to
Stay on target.
and check out the Sounds in Cinema podcast. Listen as your host, sound designer and music creator Tony Parham, and co-host, musical performer and sound lover Derek Hansen, D-Rock if you're nasty, and I am, discuss all things sound related to film, television, stage, and theatrical productions. They discuss environmental sounds, bioacoustics, dialogue, the nature of communication through sound, but as an added bonus, they drink beer and try to
Stay on target.
find them wherever you get your podcasts and listen to the pure mania of a man who can charitably be described as Doug, the dog from Up, and another man with a soothing and sultry voice trying to get that man to
Stay on target.
That's the Sounds in Cinema podcast. Tune in and listen to the sounds they are creating just for you. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. Matt and Tom and I are here discussing Airplane 2, the sequel, directed by the genius Ken Finkelman. That's what it feels like as far as you're concerned, Matt.
No. The more I talk about this movie, the angrier I'm getting.
Me
I
too.
gotta be honest.
I gotta admit, I think I'm on the same page as the two of you.
There's a lot to be angry about, and I won't know until we talk about Halloween 3, which I ranked below Airplane 2 in its watch.
Oh, you did?
I did. I ranked
right.
it below in its sort of entertainment value and watchability, because I found it to be entirely unwatchable. But I'll have to wait till we unpack that movie to see if I want to reverse, because I'm surprised by my own level of animosity toward this film. Part of that is, like I said, like this was a movie that I watched like 100 times when I was a kid. Again, it was on heavy rotation. I knew the punchlines before they were coming, not because of poor joke construction necessarily, but because I just have remembered this movie, and it was all kind of flooding back to me as I was watching it. Part of the sort of reckoning with watching some of these old movies, these movies that I grew up on and grew up seeing and saw in the movie theaters and watched on cable. Part of the reckoning of that is sort of realizing like, oh, this is the brain food that I ate when I was a kid. Like it's kind of like
Right.
reading the ingredients on a box of Twinkies. You go like, oh Jesus, like the car wash joke, the jive talking, the sort of the character of Johnny who's just sort of flitting in and out of scenes, the Japanese tourists and all of this stuff.
Oh.
This was all part of the these were just sort of it's part of the sort of the currency of comedy in the early
Molesting
80s.
priests.
Yeah, priests that are looking like so there's a joke, right? So you it's a throwaway joke. It doesn't matter when in the movie it comes, but you're showing a priest sitting on an airplane reading a copy of Boy's Life. And then he turns it sideways to look at the centerfold, which is printed
Right.
in portrait and not landscape. And that's all you see, and it's what's the guy's name? This guy from Benson. It's like this Darren McGavin. Is that his name?
Guy from Benson.
The guy from
will do
Benson.
for
Yeah,
our
guy from
purposes.
Benson.
Guy
is
from
fine.
Benson, the governor from Benson.
We usually say blonde guy.
No,
or,
okay, all right.
we're not big on names.
But yeah, it's the guy from Benson. So he's just like this sweet guy. He's playing a priest, and he's looking. And the joke is that all priests are pedophiles. And
Yeah.
and
Which surprised me, by the way. Like 1982 felt pretty early to be making that call. Am I remembering
well, I
things
think
wrong?
Mike, I think it became sort of. I think it was this like a lot of these
Not that
cultural
it
things
didn't
that we're talking
exist.
about.
Of course, it
Right.
existed, but I didn't know it was in the public consciousness that much.
But I think in the form of like this is a joke you can make.
right.
This is this is a perfectly safe joke that you can make. It will get by all of the gatekeepers and make it from the writer's room to the screen. And there are so many places for a joke to get murdered between the writer's room and the screen. Rightly so. There's so many places for a joke to get murdered. And to see these jokes having run that gauntlet such as it existed in 1982, is a testament to it's not a testament to Ken Finkelman. It's a testament to the Gauntlet itself. That the Gauntlet was not worried about these kinds of jokes and depictions, and that is a sort of the part of why these movies are sometimes really hard to watch, because it's a reckoning with what you grew up with. It's a reckoning of your own past and your own history, and what I thought was funny and what I was
counted
told
as
was
funny. Exactly right.
What I was told was funny was a priest reading Boy's Life and then turning it sideways to look at the centerfold, which, again, as a writer, it's a funny joke. It's a funny joke. It's a funny bit. But as a man sort of looking at a movie that he grew up watching, and societally, you look at that and you go, oh fuck, why was that
You're taking
funny?
the greatest horror of somebody's life and turning it into
and just
fodder for...
why was that in the totally safe joke to make column?
Yeah. And
for such a movie that
maybe,
on the whole is really, it's a very tame movie. I don't think this is not Andrew Dice Clay. We're not being bombastic here. This movie is middle of the road. It feels like it's not. Yeah. It's not going outside of itself in any way that feels dangerous, right? They are carbon copying the first movie. They're making no statement themselves. And so all of these things are completely safe jokes to make in 1982. Completely safe.
And yet it's hard to see. It's about issues, ideas that are hard to see as innocuous.
Yes.
But you're absolutely right that they're represented as innocuous. It's about how far you're willing to go for a punchline, and I have to say my mouth literally dropped when the kid turned to his dad and said, "Will there be any more headlines about the rape trial?"
Yeah. Right.
And on a visual level, later on in the movie, I think a scene that I think was meant to be slapstick comedy, but I just found very upsetting, is when a man is trying to shave in turbulence.
Yes.
And I know what they were going for, but what is on screen is just fucking horrific.
Yeah.
It's more horrific than anything in Halloween 3.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just these shocking, a lot of the shocking darkening of tone is definitely context, and another aspect of it is just misfiring on getting the tone right.
Yes.
Well, and the thing about the shaving too is because that is a total sequel thing of one-upping. I don't know if you remember, but in the first movie, there's the grandma who's trying to put on makeup.
Lipstick.
Yeah.
Lipstick before the flight ends. And so
that's a funny image.
So she's painting up her face, and they decide
what a funny image
to upstage that with the man in the bathroom and his razor.
I forgot about the grandma with the lipstick, and I think if you can imagine, so this really is the movie. This is the movie right here. You have the original airplane that says, okay, during turbulent landing, during this climax, we're going to keep cutting back to the bathroom. And there's going to be one woman who has no idea what's going on, and she's just trying to put on her lipstick. And it's just going to get all over her face. And we're just going to keep cutting back to the Lotsie of that. And that's the first movie. And then the second movie says, that was a funny joke. What if we had... What else could be red and cover an entire face?
How about a man's own blood?
How about a man's own blood? How about a man cuts himself silly? Isn't that funny? And what you have is a sort of a grotesque photocopy of what was a funny joke, as you say, Tom. That's a funny image, smeared lipstick across the face. Yeah, it's a funny image
because it doesn't involve someone cutting their own throat.
Right. And then he puts aftershave on it after it all, right? Isn't that what he does?
Yeah.
And he comes out with 1,000
pieces of toilet paper in the end. Yeah.
Yeah, they wrung every
It's the joke that
drop
keeps
out of.
on giving.
Oh my god. Yeah, that's the difference between the two movies.
That does kind of sum up the difference, right?
Yeah, I think so. And it's
Just choice, like choices. And it's hard because the original Airplane is not offensive.
true. No.
Yeah,
But
right.
for some reason, I really take I just there's sometimes where what they're prepared to do for a punchline makes me sick in a way that it doesn't with the first music. And the moment that I instantly think of, and it's almost like it's a summation of all that's wrong about the movie, all its pandering, is the little breather joke.
Oh yeah, with Hervé
Yes.
Villechaize, yeah.
Hervé Villechaize from Fantasy Island, say, I need a little breather. Hervé Villechaize, adjusts his bow tie and goes over as if to seduce
While smoking.
the... Yeah.
I always
And-
took that joke as he was breathing heavy, so he was an actual little breather. That's what I always
Ah.
took that joke as. It's funny that
Yeah, I guess that too.
he was hyperventilating.
I thought they were also making... Yeah,
I never got the
also making
sexual
something
reference.
of-
I feel so obtuse now. I never got the sexual reference to that.
Maybe it's not there, or maybe it's just
I
that...
read into it what you did, Tom.
Okay.
No, I'm
But
wrong.
that-
You guys are right. I am obtuse is the problem. I just thought they were doing an Amelia Bedelia, like we're gonna be literal and actually I could use a little breather. Let's visualize that in some literal way.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's it's riffing off the fact Fantasy Island is at the height of its popularity. So that's not good because that's
They
carbon
have a
dating
couple of
the
those
movie.
too, because Joyce DeWitt is one of the jurors in the jury room
really?
from Three's Company. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like, but the fact that they've just got, as if it's not enough the life that this man has led, you have to rope him into this movie to do this little person joke.
Yeah.
Not even a good one. With weird sexual undertones and
That were completely lost on me.
hopefully we're lost on more people than just me and Mike. But I was sad for him. I was offended for his community, and I felt like it's a gag that's not gonna date well past the end of 1982. So what's the point of doing it anyway?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're
It's not like Fantasy Island's gonna be this thing that It's not like Fantasy Island's gonna be this thing that is now being rebooted in 2021,
yeah,
right?
right. Everything
Or made into
everything
major motion pictures just a year or two
Exactly.
ago.
I've completely dispelled my own point there. Never mind.
Well, I think the you're talking about sort of the carbon dating of it, and there is I don't think that's anathema to the genre. I think
No.
in some ways that is the superpower of the genre is that it
Yeah.
can send up, it can be topical, which is movies generally don't try to be topical because they take so long to make that you can't be and so you have to sort of reach for the big and timeless
Yeah.
but these movies can actually, they're nimble enough to be topical. They're nimble enough to put in like an 11th hour ET joke,
Right.
because that is the cultural reference. And if you look at the Wayans brothers send-ups of the 90s,
Yeah.
they were up to the minute, on the movies that they were spoofing, with that kind of rapid fire thing. But whoever was behind this, and I will say it's Ken Finkelman, but acknowledging that there were probably several writers' rooms over the course of however long they did this,
Yeah.
to just punch up the jokes and just kind of
Yeah, a lot of script doctors.
yeah, just kind of
as I
joke. They
understand
just
it.
have a joke session and throw 1,000 things on the wall and pick 10.
And pick the 10 most racist.
Well, that's
or-
the thing is I go the whole ethos of who was the gatekeeper for these jokes and who was the arbiter of we're gonna put that in the movie is so different than the first movie. It really
Yeah.
the team that did Airplane, that was their first big movie. Kentucky Fried Movie was their first movie, which is its own kind of weird culty thing, and and then they went on to keep doing this, with Naked Gun
Just
and with
not
Hot
here.
Shots, and they sort of created this genre. And there was a certain, I don't know, it's just that it was their taste.
It was their thing, yeah.
It was just it was off of their taste, and like the Wayans brothers movies
Their
had a different
authorship,
taste,
too.
But here we have this one where it's like we're getting Ken Finkelman's taste here, or the taste of the panel of executives at Paramount. Like I don't know who was the gatekeeper on this, but we're getting a taste here, and the taste level is so low and so like contemptible, I guess.
But that's like Mike. I like as Mike was saying. I gravitated towards the least offensive humor that was just plain stupid, like danger vacuum, and then a vacuum attacks
Yeah,
him.
right. Yeah, exactly.
Is that a good sign? Well, it does the job. Put clipboard here and like. But I think that was more just trying to salvage the least offensive common denominator, really, the thing that I could enjoy without guilt. Not that I enjoyed the offensive comedy in this one, but it was like simple A plus B equals punchline.
Yeah.
Like those moments, and that's a lot of what Shatner's doing. It's a very simple nexus of jokes that he's embedded in, and it just and it happens fast as well, which really helps. It's like all his sequences are done at speed because he's trying to emulate the pace of a kind of Star Trek episode, and it's like I think that is where it succeeds for me, but that's probably not where it was meant to hit the hardest. In fact, they were probably writing off those jokes as just some nonsense filler. But those are the parts of the movie I gravitate towards just because they're so innocent in retrospect.
Totally. It feels like with Grease 2, you had the songs being written by different writers, different songwriters. It feels like these jokes are being written by okay, those are my sight gag guys. They're over there, and they're coming up with the guy fighting the vacuum. Those are my racist guys. They're doing all the stuff with the jive talking. And these are my TNA guys. They're gonna do all those.
A dedicated racist department.
Yeah.
I like that idea.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's the and it's like.
But it also feels, Matt, like there was that Ken Finkelman himself. It feels like they had all those departments and then they put them all together, but there was no one person looking at all of them together.
Maybe it just sort of suffered from like sequencitis, where you're filming gags and you're like, we'll fix it and edit, we'll put it all together at all, because there's a interchangeability of these scenes and all these gags that we're talking about. It feels like kind of acts in a vaudeville show, as opposed to part of the story. And I think that's, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, or like,
No.
But
We know it can work. We've seen it work.
Yeah, we've
elsewhere.
seen it work. But God, there's something just so labored about these jokes that they just seem to take forever to get to, or they wring too much out of them, like the shaving guy, or like that we were really supposed to think that Sonny Bono appearing in a movie was funny in and of itself, like that
As a terrorist. Let's not forget.
that was, but as a terrorist who was blowing up a plane because he was impotent.
Yes.
Yeah.
So again, like the internal logic of there's like,
Yeah,
where am I supposed to? I don't know. It's like, where's the handle?
There's so much of
what am I
that,
supposed to
too.
grab onto here?
Right.
Am I supposed to
Well,
grab
that's
onto
the thing.
Sonny Bono? Am I supposed to grab onto a bomb on a plane? Am I supposed to grab onto, the Cleveland Clinic joke of it all? I didn't know where to. It just.
But like Tom and I were talking about before, that's when I started gravitating towards. We got the Mayo Clinic on the line, and there's just a guy in a room with 29 jars of mayonnaise.
Yes.
I ended up liking those jokes the most.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's another 1982 connection in this movie, by the way. Did you notice that Sandal Bergman is at the end of this movie with Shatner, and she is the female lead in Conan the Barbarian?
No.
Wow.
What?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm telling you, man, 1982 is the center of the universe.
Wasn't Adrian's med in T.J. Hooker?
Yes, with Shatner.
So, there we go. Shatner's med coming together to form T.J. Hooker.
He's so good in this. I mean, there's a moment where we've talked before when we did our watch along of Star Trek: The Motion Picture how one of the things we've noticed about Shatner's acting is that he changes track mid-sentence. Like his thought process, you can see his thought process changing mid-sentence, and it happens here. And I'm just grateful for that level, that detail of self-spoof that only really he's doing in this movie.
I think we can all agree that the Shatner of it all is like, to me, it's the only thing worth watching. Like if you were to say should I watch Airplane 2? I'd be like, watch the last 25, 30 minutes.
20 minutes, yeah. I was also struck by how good the effects were in this movie.
It had a budget.
What does everyone think? What does everyone think about that? I mean, that was one of the spoof targets of the original was how bad it was referencing movies where the effects weren't very good. Is this because it's science fiction? They feel the need to they can't make that joke because it's science fiction, and in general the effects in late 70s, early 80s science fiction are really good that they feel like they have to compete with that. I don't know. It was very confusing for me. I was like, wow, that's a good piece of back projection. The model of the shuttle looks really good. What's going on here? This is an airplane movie.
My sense is that it had a much bigger budget than the first one, and so they probably did.
That's what they spent their money on.
Put it toward production value, but as you're kind of maybe hinting at, Tom, they might have been better served by making it look cheap.
I think so.
And sending up the cheap-looking, B sci-fi.
I think
which I guess is what they're doing in the only in the Shatner bits. Everywhere else in the movie, everything looked really good for 1982.
The shuttle liftoff looked fine, especially for the time.
But when it's going towards the sun and then it does the U-turn,
that's just the sight gag.
That's the sight, So I think they're playing into it at times, trying to make it look silly.
But yeah, I thought that was a missed opportunity to take aim at some of the TV sci-fi or something like that. But again, that's not as big a part of the movie as you'd think for a movie that's set in space in the future.
Yeah.
Right.
I generally, my rule of thumb is that money is the enemy of comedy. And that, the bigger the budget, the less funny your comedy is going to be. And so I sort of see that. I see the inherent scrappiness that comes with making a low budget film being part of what kind of gives a comedy its life, and so when they have to shoot a larger budget thing with whether there's effect shots or all that, it tends to kind of slow down the production and make it less about the people doing funny things and more about we got to make it look good.
Yeah.
And I thought in a completely in a pure pastiche way, they the science fiction movies that they were visually taking on, they did a good job of simulating that with the sort of fisheye lens effect from 2001.
Mm-hmm.
The Star Wars crawl, it feels more past, because there's kind of two ways that even the Zuckers go, that you have there's the parody of the thing you're doing, and you're either doing the pastiche version of that, like Police Squad, which there is no discernible difference between an episode of Police Squad and an episode of Dragnet.
Right.
They're both equally as funny, and Airplane's kind of more in that direction.
Yeah.
And the later Hot Shots and the Naked Gun movies are a bit more, bit more cartoonish,
Right.
in style. But here I was like, yeah, that looks like the scene from 2001. Like, that's a really credible. I mean, maybe that speaks to the money of it, that they put that money into emulating the production values of science fiction films. So I'm like, but there's no joke there. It's just our acknowledgement that this looks the same.
Yeah, there's no joke.
So it really
there.
is the enemy of comedy, as you're saying, because it's a level of humorless pastiche.
I do remember thinking, Tom, that I wished that a few years later, when they were making Rambo First Blood Part 2, in our last episodes, we talked about the computers at the end of that movie. And I remember wishing that the people from that movie had talked to the people from this movie or Halloween 3 about making a computer look...
What computers look like?
Yeah, exactly. As opposed to just silver boxes with lights on it, but...
Hey, maybe they were the same boxes. Maybe there was like 3 computers that went around all the movie studios.
Right.
That sounds about right. That there was one prop house that specialized in computers, because nobody knew what computers were or what they could do, which is why all the movies from this era are about fear of computers.
Right.
And
definitely.
Yeah, it's a
Well,
real.
and I have a note here that says,
so true.
Shouldn't James Cameron have directed this movie?
I don't know about that note, man. I'm not gonna. You could take that note on the highway. I'm gonna keep that note on local roads.
I did notice that, like Superman 3, there is another moment in this movie where the inability to visualize what even near future technology would look like means that they just fall back on it looks like a video game.
Yeah.
Which
Again,
we've seen in Superman 3 and many other movies. It's just like, it's a kid, like a kid is playing Mission Control like a video game. And while that's, within this movie, that is the gag. It's like, it's turning into an arcade game. We know from other movies around this time that there was no other way to represent computers except as a video arcade.
Because
As Atari.
it was the thing that the adults making the movies didn't understand. It was it was the mysterious thing that they just took as threatening. And so, it gives you war games, and it gives you, the gag in this movie, which is Mission Control. A kid sits down at the computer and plays it like a video game and crashes the incoming
And
shuttle.
kills a bunch of people.
And kills a bunch of people, and
That's
just
right.
kind of like, he's this little prep school kid with a red tie. There's all of these like Reaganite kind of figures in this, floating in and out of this movie that just do so much damage everywhere they go. I'm thinking of the young woman who's saying, "Oh, I don't think we're going to make it through this," and I've never been with a man before.
By the end, she's fucking a mule.
Right. She herself is sort of like a prep school kind of figure, but like the first person she talks to is like, this young guy in a suit, and like these, there are so like the two businessmen who kiss each other. Like there's all of these like besuited businessmen,
Yeah, right.
just being sort of the agents of chaos throughout the film. That again, when we get to Halloween 3, the besuited businessman is such a trope, along with
Being played writ large.
Yeah, it's such a trope of the era, along with the video game apocalypse.
That's a big part of the hypocrisy in this movie, that they're kind of taking pot shots at Reagan, they're taking pot shots at the Catholic Church, these big institutions coming off as, satirists and oppositional thinkers, but at the heart of the movie, the overall sense of it is very pro Reaganite America.
Absolutely. That's what we're saying about sort of the racism and the sexism. It's all a part of sort of edifying the white man, right? All of these jokes are and the currency of this humor is all designed to make the white man feel better about himself.
Right.
And so yes, they're saying like, fuck this Reagan guy in one scene.
Yeah.
But then they're sort of celebrating the triumph of the white
Of
man
Reagan's
and the white
America.
savior.
Yeah.
And there's literally a scene which where and again it's a science fiction joke projecting into the future as the source of your comedy, but what's really behind it is the scene with the couple, the middle-aged couple talking about being at Woodstock.
Yeah.
Right.
And what's behind that scene for me is, hey liberals, you lost.
Yes, and
You're done.
absolutely, and that even the most diehard, of the Woodstock generation are now wear suits.
Yeah.
And they're middle aged and they're lumpy, and it didn't last. The party didn't last.
Well, at the same time, when they do that PBS parody, they're playing the other side of the debate where they're saying, everything's getting too liberal. It's there's lots of.
What is the internal logic of this movie? Where's this movie coming from? Like, what does this movie have to say? Like, say, is this a counterculture movie, or is this a status quo kind of institutional movie? Like, where this
No,
movie
it's absolutely
is
the institutional movie.
I just feel like this movie kind of ducks away from everything out of fear of being anything.
Yeah.
Right.
But
like,
I think I mean it's easy. I think it's easier now to see it as a
Moral mess.
well, that too. But yeah, to see it as very, pro status quo, deeply entrenched conservative. But I think it's actually worse than that because it's pretending to be countercultural to some extent.
There are
And
those
that is more
moments,
offensive
right.
to me than a movie like a Rambo movie, which is just like
jingoistic.
it's just like worships at the altar of Reagan, but you can take it on face value. With this movie, it's trying to hide behind these satirical bells and whistles that portrays it like the dark soul of a Reagan Republican.
It's like this weird. It's wearing a mask in a certain way, and I know, like, I mean,
Silver Shamrock mask.
I think it's official. I think it's official now. We have talked about this movie more than anyone who made it.
yeah,
I think
It's been
to
disowned
me,
by everyone.
I think to me, like, that's my first takeaway from this movie is like, oh, this was just kind of stamped out quickly, and they threw Ken on it, and he hung on for his life,
dear life.
and they had a bunch of punch up gag sessions with all whoever was, the probably
Babaloos.
man, probably white group, like affordable writers at that time. And there was no it wasn't coming from any one point of view. It wasn't cohesive. It was throw everything against the wall, pack it. Let's get it out by Christmas, kind of.
Yeah.
That's what that's my initial impression of when I'm watching this movie. But then when I kind of have to take a step back and think, like, who made this movie and what were they trying to say? What were they trying to do? Was it nothing? Like, were they trying to say and do nothing, or was there something that I missed?
I think maybe the ideas, whatever they were coming so fast at them that it's about 100 different things that was never, given any kind of cohesion.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like you said, they just kept throwing things at the wall, And then they looked at the wall and said, well, that's a pretty decent mosaic full of shitty ideas. Let's go with that. And done. That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, it's the fact. I mean, a lot of this comes down to authorship, and this. Now that the Zuckers are gone, it's basically someone from the outside looking in, thinking, "This looks easy."
Yeah.
It looks easy to string together a bunch of gags, but you know that there is like a, there is a machine in the middle of it, which is making sense of it all, and that's the kind of authorship part of it, and the ability to go, no, that gag doesn't work, let's move this one here. And you're right, I don't think there's any thought put into the flow of humor in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's because that, I mean, one of the kind of worst things about reviewing comedy, any kind of comedy, is when reviewers fall back on, it's hit and miss. It's like, do you know how hard comedy writers have to work to get any kind of hits?
Yeah.
And do you know how the misses are playing into making the hits better and all that sort of stuff?
Right.
And I think this is like cynicism, as Matt said, exactly to come into this and go, how hard can it be to string a bunch of sight gags together with a few boobs in the middle of them?
That seems to be the depth of the mission statement that they were working with.
Yeah, right.
And so as a viewer, I get a bit ticked off.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a different thought about Airplane 2 and disagree with us, you're going to have to let us know. Find us on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. Send us an email to everythingsequel@gmail.com and let us know your thoughts. Tom and I rate this movie dead last. Matt might be on the fence now. I believe you ranked it third.
I ranked it third. Halloween 3 is still less watchable than this.
That movie did a number on you.
I'll say.
If you think that's a more successful movie than this.
I didn't say more successful. I said less watchable.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you next time for Piranha 2, The Spawning. Say goodbye, boys.
Goodbye. Can we just do it right now? Do we have to wait?
I just wanted to mention George Wendt checks a baby
That's right.
in this movie.
Norm.
That's neither here nor there, but I did want to mention it.
Duly
Yeah, it's good to
noted.
get that off your chest.
Yeah, exactly. All right, take care, everybody. We'll see you next time.